This little video is on the light reactions of photosynthesis. This green shape represents the thylakoid pancake inside the chloroplast, which there are many, designed to be thin to increase surface area to volume ratio. So there's our thylakoid. It's a double lipid bilayer. The model begins with water being absorbed by the plant roots, travels up through the stem and leaves and diffuses into the cell and eventually into the thylakoid, where it splits into its three main components: hydrogen ions, electrons, and oxygen. After several water molecules split, there's enough oxygen to form oxygen gas, which diffuses out through the stomata and the leaves. At this point in our story, I want to introduce this yellow protein structure called the photosystem, which evolved to absorb energy from the sun. Besides helping to split water, the energy from the sun enables the electrons that are created to go bumpity, bumpity, bumpity down the thylakoid membrane. This is called the electron transport chain, so we'll just abbreviate that with the ETC. At this point, I want to introduce an active transport protein that is embedded in the thylakoid membrane. This protein is called the H+ pump, and it will be used to pump hydrogen ions, as you'll see. You'll see where these hydrogen ions come from in a moment, but for now just realize that the energy from the moving electrons forces hydrogen ions into the thylakoid against their concentration gradient. The concentration inside can be up to 1,000 times greater than outside the membrane. So I'm going to draw a whole bunch of hydrogen ions in here to represent this. Now, of course, it would take a bit of time to accumulate this many. But I want you to envision that this thylakoid is starting to fill up with hydrogen ions. Next, I want to introduce another surface protein embedded in the thylakoid membrane. It kind of reminds me of one of those revolving doors at the bank. I think there's some kind of little propeller-like device on the end. This protein is called NADPH synthase. I also call it the ATP machine. When the concentration builds up to an extent, the hydrogen ions are forced through the ATP machine, where they interact with this little mechanism and somehow cause this thing to spin around, just like at the revolving door at the bank or airport. The result of this spinning action is that the low energy molecule adenosine diphosphate gets chemically combined with the lone phosphate group to make the high energy molecule known as ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This is also known as the energy currency of the cell, so I'll put a $sign beside that. This is one of the main goals of the light reaction, to create this ATP. So each time a hydrogen ion flows through the ATP machine, another molecule of ATP is made. The hydrogen ions then have two more jobs. Some of them migrate back around here and end up being pumped back inside in a continuous loop like this. To tell you what happens to the others, I need to introduce a second photosystem. This one is also evolved to absorb energy from the sun. Remember those electrons? Well, after they go through the pump, they lose energy. So they kind of wimp along here until they reach the second photosystem, where they get supercharged again and full of life. And they go bumpity, bumpity, bump along the electron transport chain until they reach yet another surface protein mounted in the membrane. This one's called NADPH reductase, and I'm not even going to try and abbreviate that. When these electrons reach the NADPH reductase, they get ejected out of the membrane and back into the stroma of the chloroplast. So I'll draw an electron here to help us remember what happened. And some of these hydrogen ions migrate around here, and they get combined with these electrons and NADP+. The three of these get together and form a molecule of NADPH, which is also a very good energy storage molecule. Creating NADPH is also one of the main goals of the light reactions. So to summarize, the energy from the sun is what makes the electrons move along the electron transport chain. And it's the force of these moving electrons that makes the hydrogen ion pump hydrogen from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell. Once the concentration of hydrogen ions builds up enough, they go squirting out through ATP synthase, making the propeller go around. The energy from the moving propeller combines adenosine diphosphate and its lone phosphate to make a high-energy molecule known as ATP. And finally, after the electrons get another boost of energy from the second photosystem, they reach NADPH reductase and they get ejected into the stroma, where they meet up with some of those hydrogen ions and some molecules of NADP+ to make the second energy storage molecule known as NADPH. Both the NADPH and the ATP will be used in the Calvin cycle. That's it.